Hello everyone, welcome along to Live on Air tonight. I've got sitting next to me Dale Jones. I'm not quite sure what title to call Dale because he was an MP for many years. Is there a title that goes with after retirement?
No. Has been is more personal.
I don't like it. We hope to have John Evans coming in from Bundaberg in Australia. We haven't got anyone with us at present, but Dale, would you like to introduce yourself? Just say whatever you'd like about your background.
Oh, well, I'm Dale Jones. I'm about the same age as mine host, and married with 3 children. Work in the Kiwiconnexion area of Auckland as a lawyer, practicing law. I say to people, one day I'll get good at it and I might stop practicing then.
I think Dale is a pretty good lawyer. He was also, as I said, an MP for a number of years, and we're going to draw on the wealth of his experience just to allow him to open up on some, I think they're quite fundamental questions for Christians today, for people that are in congregations, for people that might be experiencing relationship difficulties. All of these things sort of impact. So without any further ado, I'll just bring up the screen share so you can see what we're going to look at this evening. We've started from Jean-Paul Sartre, who after World War II, when he was writing his philosophy of existentialism, he suggested that people were guilty of bad faith because they weren't being true to themselves. Now, with that as a sort of a background, we're going to just look at 3 topic areas tonight. First of all, what do we mean by good faith and therefore bad faith? And is the legal definition that sort of Dale and hopefully John will present, is that robust? We're going to try and imagine situations where keeping good faith gets overcome by other necessities in life. And finally, we're going to ask, if we have time, whether the state can and should override personal moral responsibility. So those are our question topics, but let me just remind viewers, we've got 4 concurrent viewers sitting with us. If you want to feed questions in, you'll see on your viewer up the top a little Q&A. Click it, wait for a minute or so, and then you'll be able to type your question in at the bottom. We've already got 3 questions in, which we will deal with as we go through. So Max and Stuart, your questions will come up in the more general questions and we'll time log those in the video. So that's a lot of talking from me, and I'm going to put Dale straight on the spot. Dale, what do you understand by the terms good and bad faith? What do they mean?
Well, for a lawyer, it's drilled into me that lawyers must act in good faith. And basically, those of us who do property law work, the law is that it must be undertaken in good faith, but property must be bought in good faith and such like. Otherwise, the whole transaction can be overturned. So good faith is a very important part of the legal system. And personally, of course, you just have to have certain principles by which you should live, which one might call good faith, honest, decent principles, and you must adhere to them.
So is this sort of universal, or is this just something that has been developed in Western culture, or is it found in other cultures as well?
No, I would say that every society has some sort of a principle of behavior, even the mafia, because Nostra has some very severe tests for belonging to the group. But we're talking about good faith in the sense of a decent moral behavior rather than activating criminal behavior, of course. But I would say every society has a standard which must be maintained.
I think that's an important thing to understand, because there will be differences between cultural expressions, won't there, of what constitutes good faith.
Yes.
Your mafia example absolutely fascinates me. Do you mean sort of like honour among thieves?
Oh, absolutely. But there is a standard which must be obeyed within the mafia, of course, in Nostra, and you're part of that group, and you must obey everything they say. If you don't, you're in serious trouble. And the standards they set are not very good. You know, if you're in a situation where people have been murdered, well, you keep your mouth shut. Keeping quiet is one of the biggest principles of the mafia system.
Well, that's the most unexpected introduction to live on air that we've come across, talking about the mafia. I've just got a question. John Evans is watching us, but he's not able to get in to the presenter area. John, just go back to your emails and look for the email that talks about the presenters link and click that, and hopefully you should come in. So just sticking with Dale at present, Dale has given us a definition of good faith, but in his experience as a lawyer, he's got dozens, if not hundreds or thousands examples. Yes. Of, well, do people come to you in good faith, or what?
Well, this usually applies in the criminal area and civil law and such like, where you're suing people for damage and defamation and things like that. But people can often sincerely believe, for example, that they were driving along the road and that when they went through the traffic light, it was green, whereas everyone around them will say, no, it was red. Now, 50% of the time, they genuinely believe it was green, but at least 50% of the time, they know jolly well that it was red. And they're trying to somehow get out of it and come to see you, particularly as a lawyer, to say, can you get me off this? And so it sort of covers a few of the things you've raised with me, that do you as a lawyer do things which are necessarily bad faith? And technically, yes, you could try to get these people off on a technical defense. And I've actually did that once. I'm sure that's possibly what happened. Someone went through the traffic light, which is why I remember, but the traffic officer lost sight of them for a while, and it may not have been the same vehicle that he stopped later on.
Okay.
That's what you call a technicality.
This is a fascinating conversation from a layperson's perspective, talking about what good faith might mean. What about in terms of, let's say, marriage relationships? There's a whole court system, isn't there? A family court system. There must, and I've seen this as a minister when there have been some quite severe breakups in families.
Well, one of the greatest areas of perjury that takes place in New Zealand, at least on a weekly basis, is in the family court, where you read documents which are on oath, and you read the other viewpoint, which is on oath, and they're totally different. Now, one of them has to be lying, because they can't be so diverse. And as a lawyer, you're confronted with this all the time. Regrettably, the court system does not try and find out which one of them is telling the truth. Poor old judge throws his hand up in the air and tries to be like Solomon and come to a decision which brings the matter to an end. But there's a lot of bad faith in those cases.
And that area of relationships is messy because, well, it may be that there's not just two parties involved. There's often the third, the children.
Oh, well, there's children, and occasionally the children are almost forced to say something which isn't strictly correct. Because maybe they want to be with one parent as opposed to the other. But that's the best thing I find in a matrimonial case is when the parties have agreed between themselves as to what property they want, how they will look after the children in the future. And that, I think, is the best example. You could have a good faith, they're concerned about their children and such like, and they bring all matters to an end. And all you have to do is prepare a document giving effect to that. But occasionally we get stuck in dreadful cases.
Yeah, that case recently in Australia where the Channel something or other news team went and were actively participating with the mother. I mean, the whole thing from start to finish.
That was the one in Lebanon. Yes, yeah. Well, That's just the news media for you. The news media, and as an MP, I came across them many, many times. They're a law unto themselves. There's no such thing as good faith or bad faith. It's all about the reviews and the ratings with the news media. They're the best example of bad faith I think you could have today, and they're doing it for money as well.
Well, yeah, the media is. We're just aware that John is having a bit of technical difficulty getting in, and I can't do anything about that. But John, you could feed your comments in, and I'll highlight them, and we will pick them up that way. So that would be fantastic. We've alongside of John, we've got 5 concurrent viewers, so that's good, and anyone can ask a question. Okay, so Dale, Jean-Paul Sartre said bad faith was when you weren't really being true to yourself. Does that ring true to you from a legal perspective?
Oh, that's very true, of course. And you know when you're in bad faith, don't you? You have a certain standard. You should be behaving in a particular way, and you don't. So he's reversed it in a way. It's easier to talk about good faith than it is to talk about bad faith. You think more of good than bad, but people must know when they're acting in bad faith.
Yeah, I think if I've read only a very tiny amount of Jean-Paul Sartre, but I've got here a wonderful book, a 4-volume set on philosophy in the modern world. And the summary of Sartre said that he wrote that immediately after World War II. So, you know, trying to understand how whole societies could come to positions of
and especially Christians. Because, you know, on both sides of the conflict, you had Christians killing each other. It's just incredible how the world can get to that stage sometimes.
Yeah, he was concerned that the world was chaotic. It descended into chaos. And hence, I think that's where his negative definition arises from.
Right.
Amidst the chaos, you've got to have some kind of measure. And I'm just going to select Stuart Mannon's question, where he said, isn't good and bad measured against the intended purpose of faith? Any comments on that, Dale?
Yes, they're measured against, I wouldn't have thought the purpose of it, but I would have thought your principles. Are your principles good? Are your principles bad? Is your faith good? Is your faith bad? The end result, well, unfortunately, the end result, you can bend your views to reach a certain end if you want to, but you may be exercising bad faith to reach that end.
Okay.
In my view.
Now, for those of you that have read the little bio that I sent out in night school, you'll be aware that Dale, for donkey's years, was an MP. Just if you would say, Dale, you were first with one party, then with another.
Yes, I was with the National Party from 1975 to 1984, Sir Robert Muldoon's government. And then from 2002 to 2005, and again in 2008, I was with New Zealand First in Parliament. So I've experienced First Master Post and MMP, which is...
that's interesting.
I've done them both.
Which is the better system in your personal opinion?
Well, probably MMP is the better system from the point of view of minority groups being given a chance to express their point of view. In First Master Post, it's the one party in power which wins every time, and small people don't get a chance to have any say in the government. So MMP is better in that respect.
I think overall it is, but it's a bit of a messy system, and I think when we're answering Stuart Mannon's question, the good and bad measured against the intended purpose of faith, I'm going to say, Stuart, that we've answered that one because we don't think it's measured against the intended purpose, but rather it's measured against intended principle.
Yes.
Or not even intended principles, the principles that are arrived at. So let me just bring up the screen share again, and let's just remind ourselves of what are the other questions that are at stake here. And we're saying, well, I think we've arrived at a robust definition, whether it's the negative or the positive. But can you imagine, Dale, situations where keeping faith, good faith, gets overcome by the necessities of roles in life? Any comments about that?
Well, I think so often you know what you ought to be doing, and then there might be a family situation, and that's usually the hardest one, where someone close to you has done something wrong. Should you protect that person from what they've done that's wrong? And so often families will say, someone comes home, they've damaged the car, and they might have injured someone, and they won't reveal that the car's been damaged and that a member of their family caused damage and the injury. That's where societal demands, family demands can be bent and should not be bent. And it's a very good family with sound principles who says to the son or the daughter, well, you've done this wrong, you must own up and go to the police.
That which is, I imagine, is extremely hard to be able to do as parents.
Strangely enough, there was a case just last weekend with this man who had been interfering with young children in a certain part of Auckland, went down to see his brother in Wanganui and mentioned to his brother that he was having these problems. And his brother said, there's only one thing you should do, let's go to the police. And they went to the police, and he admitted crimes going back 20 years. So, you know, there's hope for us all.
Well, I think that's a marvellous example because when you talk about hope in that situation, it's like the person has fronted up and confessed and said, I know I'm not right. And then hope can emerge. But no hope can emerge when the person refuses to acknowledge.
Yes. I think deep down, most of the people would want to admit it, but they can't. And this example I've just given you was, I thought, quite wonderful. How somehow they, and I've done criminal work as well. You see people come in and finally they get caught, and what the first thing they do is, okay, I got caught for this job, but look, I've done 54 others, so let's do me for 55, which of course is just a subterfuge because they get the same sentence whether it's 1 or 55 just about, but it sort of cleans their slate to some extent.
Okay. I think that's important by acknowledging that we've done something wrong, we do have a chance. And this, of course, is the essence of the Christian message.
Yes.
Every day is a new day. If you are able to acknowledge that you need that new start, that fresh start. I'm going to just select Max Thompson's question now. And Max has written this. He said, and he speaks as an engineer, from an engineering perspective, acting in good faith is designing what one believes is best for the future, consistent with sustainability and social responsibility. Oh, I like that. How do politicians act in good faith when they're required to toe the party line?
Well, from 75 to 84, for example, and for a little time after that, we used to have a manifesto. People may recall at election time, the parties would give out their manifesto, and what we were going to do was set out in it. And in our case, in the National Party government from 75 to 84, if you had a problem and you weren't quite sure what your policy was, we kept the manifesto in the left-hand drawer of the caucus room table. And if there was a problem, Sir Robert Monturn or whoever would say, let's have a look at the manifesto, what does it say? So we try to keep good faith on that. But I think nowadays, when you talk about a broad principle such as let the market decide, and I think that's what happened in the 90s, for example, when they decided in the engineering industry and in the building industry that they would let the market decide when it came to the construction of buildings, the timber to be utilized, and then the design of the buildings. It all fell apart, and we ended up with a dreadful weather-type home, leaky home problem. And the principle, you might say they adhere to that principle, which was let market forces rule. Well, it doesn't work like that. People go to build a house, they act on the advice of the people building the house to a large extent, and believe they're honest and have certain good faith principles, which turned out to be not the case at all levels, I think, in the weather-tight home situation.
I mean, that is the weather tightness issue is huge, and it's had a huge effect on numerous people. I can think of one minister that got very badly caught on this. But then there were other cases of the, I'm not quite sure whether they were Ponzi schemes of investment, buying off plans and things like that.
Yes.
And one poor chap that I came across, a very pleasant guy, a retired minister, had been the only place he could live. His retirement in New Zealand was at Raurimu. Every part of his savings and etc. gone.
There was dreadful bad faith, and I had an elderly client, for example, who had a few $100,000 to invest, and I had to witness some forms with this person. I was taking my time to read them and making sure they were okay. And this agent rang up and said, "Look, you're delaying all this. She's going to make a lot of money on this. This is in the 90s and such like, and let's have those forms back." Now, it all went bust. You know, I completed the forms and sent them back. But it turned out that the whole thing was a scam. This was throughout, and we had about $1 billion worth of money in New Zealand lost through that type of operation. And the annoying thing is, I had one again the other day, where this person was saying to their parents to do certain things. And I said, "No, hold on. We've been through all this before." So this bad faith is still there in our system. It's inherent. Happens in New Zealand every 15 years or so. We've got to be very careful about it. Sadly, it's a sad statement of our society.
I find that quite sobering because I understand Max's question, but there are fads and phases in engineering. Because the leaky building syndrome was based on fads and, we can correct the problem, which was already acknowledged in Canada. And so in good faith, I suppose architects and engineers and builders went ahead and did this, but in a other kind of sense, it wasn't really very circumspect. It didn't become consistent with sustainability and social responsibility.
A lot of people who were unable to get insurance for their practices in the building industry because they'd breached all the terms of their negligence policies already. There was clear negligence, and that's what all the cases go on, negligence. And but it's always wise, being wise after the event. Hopefully we will learn and not do it, but it seems to be generational. Another 25 years and it happens again in New Zealand.
Right. You also mentioned, Dale, when you were a national MP in the Muldoon era, the manifesto sat in the corner cabinet.
No, in the desk, which Muldoon, Sir Robert sat with the secretary, and it was on the drawer and was pulled out if necessary.
So that actually is good faith, isn't it? That's the other part of Max's question. Said, how do politicians act in good faith when they're required to follow the party line? Now, in good faith, they presumably got elected. This is our manifesto. This is what we're going to follow. Am I right?
Of course, yes. But nowadays, of course, you don't see a manifesto. So what is the party line? It appears to be whatever one or perhaps two people think it is on the day, and then with the narrow margins that the government has today, 1 or 2 votes available, I think everyone well and truly kicks in the party line, because otherwise we'd have regular elections.
Most parties now will talk about their policies, and they appear to be devising policies based on their interviewing certain selected groups. You know, what's a popular policy rather than what's a necessary policy.
We're running my survey today, but they get surveys done all the time, and they decide that will be the policy. Because we don't have a manifesto anymore, do we? When last did the political party at election time say, here's our manifesto on all the issues where cabinet ministers have responsibilities, and this is what we'll do.
Dale, just using your international experience here that you would have gathered as a politician, do things like United Nations and their quasi-organisations, they do run off manifestos, don't they?
Oh, I think that United Nations, I think we have to pray for the United Nations every day, because they're made up of so many different people with no standards whatsoever. You know, in New Zealand, we're in the top 10 of everything, whereas when you get down to 45 plus, and there are 190 countries in the world, you know, if Helen Clark gets the job of leader of the United Nations, for once I might have to pray for her. I've never been a supporter of Helen Clark. Hopefully her principles are good principles.
I have, and I think they are. But I think it must probably be the most thankless task. I mean, it's so important that it becomes impossible to fulfill all the demands that are placed on you.
You saw what happened with the Ebola situation in West Africa. They could have stopped that early in the piece, but all the top people were collecting the money and keeping it, not spending it on the sick. So it's a terrible situation. And by the time you do something about it, they're gone.
Right. Okay. I think, Max, we've done answering that question about politicians acting in good faith. The manifesto used to be the way that they kept the faith, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
Now, John Evans has fed us through an interesting comment, and I'm just going to select some of John's comments here. Said an example from the church perspective, because John is, could I say, he was the General Secretary for the Uniting Church, the Western Australia area, or Synod. So he's well versed, I suppose, in church politics, which I don't know whether they're good faith or bad faith. But John's question is this: he says, an example for the church is how it answers the issue of child sexual abuse. Yeah. The problem in Australia has been that the Catholic Church hasn't acted in good faith. It's been more interested in the institution. Any comments on that?
Well, I went to Catholic schools, although I'm Church of England, essentially, and now I go along to Waiake. But it's very clear that the Catholic Church has been more interested in the institution in more ways than justice, which is very sad, because I went to school in Quechua in Balochistan, and I was looked after by the nuns. They were wonderful women. They did a wonderful, wonderful job, you know, and God must have been on their side. But what these other people have done, the children in their care, is, well, you almost felt that something might be happening, but you never knew for sure. You know, you joked about it. And for all of this to be happened, and then for a Christian not to admit that they've acted in bad faith, bad Christianity, and take the consequences and do something about it, well, it's brought the whole religious, the whole Christian faith, all faiths, into very much a grave disrepute.
Yeah, I think it is a big issue. I think it's a bigger issue for Catholicism in Australia than New Zealand, but there are instances in New Zealand just as much.
The churches were trying to help young people whose families are broken up and are living in the church institutions, and unfortunately they took advantage of them, which was very, very sad. A really good plan was destroyed by the behaviour of a few, as usual.
Yeah. John, thank you for that comment. I'm also now going to just bring up another comment of yours, and we'll just see how this reads. It says the examples that you refer to in terms of good and bad faith, the sanctity of the confessional in court. Now, I'm not sure about that. I understand the sanctity of the confessional in a religious sense. What does John mean by that?
Well, we have the Evidence Act, and whatever is said in a confessional is not eligible to be given as evidence in court. It's the law as well as church practice. We recognize the practice of the church in that sense, and it's usually the Catholic Church, but I assume it's a question of when you get a confession, making sure as a minister that it's in a confessional situation, not over a cup of tea and a biscuit or something somewhere, and what is said in that context should be privileged and not be used and cannot be used in court.
I didn't know that. Thank you for drawing that attention, both Dale and John there. And also John goes on to highlight the journalist's profession in the same way.
I have little regard for the journalist's so-called right of silence. And I know I've used it and I've rung up a journalist. Look, I'm giving you this information, but I don't want to be named, or just in passing, I'm telling you this or whatever. Would you like to have a look at this, that, or the other? That's what happens all the time. I guess it's the way in which our system works. But journalists are not priests, ministers. They are the, rhyme them sometimes, they are the fourth estate. In Olympic terms, they wouldn't make a medal.
That's
they treat themselves as if they won a double gold. You know? They're almost above ministers and such like in the sanctity, you might say, or the privilege that they have. It's a privilege. It's a legal privilege. They've created for themselves. It is not anything at law, although judges seem to recognize it more and more now.
Okay. What about, John raises the final point there. He talks about privileges that might be pertaining when you're talking about the context of national security. This must be an increasing problem.
Well, it's always been a problem, and it's, the trouble is someone can decide to tell you something and say, well, this is absolutely confidential. It's a national security issue. You've got to tell me you'll never repeat it, and you'll go to your grave not revealing it to anybody. And national security should be very, very important. You know, and nowadays the SIS doesn't. Well, in my time in the Muldoon area, we had the SIS going over its budget, and we could ask them about that budget, but we could never ask them about security matters, of course, and we couldn't even reveal that budget. That budget was absolutely confidential. It wasn't debated or anything, but they just disclosed that's how much we spent. So national security would then be defined by a judge as to whether it was a national security issue. And we have Mr. to thank them otherwise for a wide range of High Court and Supreme Court decisions on what is that type of security today.
Right, and also the various leaks, the WikiLeaks and so on. And
there's some very brave people to come up with those things, and I think they're doing a public service by disclosing that information. The Panama Papers recently, for example, that's legal privilege gone astray, but it shows how legal privilege can be abused. If people conceal information which they pretend doesn't actually pertain to them, you know, concealing their wealth and such like, and then pretending they hadn't got a bob to rub together.
Yeah, I think this is those Panama Papers. They've got worldwide repercussions, haven't they? And
even in New Zealand, we've been a party to the Panama Papers, and we'd get quite a shock about that. There may be commercial advantages of it, but the type of people who want that anonymity are often not very nice people.
Right.
They're people who act in bad faith most of the time.
Which is why they require the anonymity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why do you want to hide it? You know, why do you want to conceal the fact that you're a multi-billionaire and you pay no tax? That's really bad faith.
That's interesting. John, thank you for that. That's very interesting. I'm reminded in terms of national security, that my favourite brand of fiction is the Cold War spy novel and all of that.
Jean Le
Carré. And one of the most interesting novels that I've read in recent times, I'm not a great novel reader, I just tend to devour technical manuals these days, but that was by Stella Rimington, who was the former head of MI6.
Oh, nice. And
she's written 2 or 3 spy novels. And the interesting thing here is Dale started the conversation about tonight's live on air talking about mafia. And of course, this whole area of gangs in an international sense, terrorism in an international sense, this is where security services tend to be focusing very much in Australia, of course, with constant threat.
Well, we don't know what's happened on the Egyptian plane yet.
No, it's another tragedy in the air. We're coming close, Dale. We've just got 5 minutes to go, and I would like to ask you, because, and I hope you don't mind me asking, it's a personal question I'm going to put to you. It is there in your Wikipedia entry, which was done because all the MPs have to have a Wikipedia entry. And when we were emailing, John Evans picked this up, and he said he hadn't been stabbed by as a lawyer he hadn't been stabbed, as a churchman he hadn't been stabbed, but you were pretty seriously assaulted.
Well, I was the Member of Parliament for Waitemata, which stopped in Kiwi, which is just north of Auckland. The boundary changed, and I inherited an area which went about another 80 kilometres north. In that area was a certain person who, in the preceding MP's time, had committed a traffic offence, allegedly. It was exceeding 50 k's or something. He got a ticket, but he denied that he ever done it. This is how we got back to it. I tried to block it out of my mind. So the boundaries changed, and I inherited this person. My wife and I went to see him at his home with his family. I tried to do what I could for him. In the meantime, he tried to set fire to the Supreme Court, High Court twice. And the former MP was under sort of a guard. But I saw him at a community house once. And then he made an appointment to see me at a community house again, with the sole intention of stabbing me. It was in his confession. The statement to the police was virtually a confession. Yes, he meant to stab me in the stomach, but he didn't mean to kill me. I managed to divert it, and I got it under the arm. But he was put into Oakley. He was put into psychiatric. It was very sad. It was the middle of winter. It was in fact about the 20th of June, and I had on 3 layers of clothing, including a heavy jacket. And that, I think, reduced the damage.
Well, Dale, one of the reasons I asked that, John over in Australia, when he was in Melbourne, minister in Melbourne, he said he had someone he was helping, I can't remember if it was a homeless person, someone threw a very large lump of concrete at him. Now, I've made reference in Live on Air before to having had parsonage windows, bricks filled through them, because I used to write a column for a newspaper and people took exception to what I said. In a sense, when you do take public stands, you become more vulnerable to people. It's not good faith, bad faith on their part, but they have become...
Well, at the time, remember Miss Bartlett, Patricia Bartlett?
Yes.
She used to come and see me, and I was taking a stand on her behalf with regard to pornography, being against pornography. So I was getting quite a lot of publicity in the paper on that. And I think this person thought he wanted to injure a Member of Parliament with a profile, which I had, and I was his Member of Parliament too, by coincidence at that time. And that's the only thought that was mine. He wanted another rehearing, so the Prime Minister said he was deranged, and he sued the Prime Minister for defamation. So we had a 5-day High Court hearing in which he sued the Prime Minister for defamation. People, it wasn't a brick to the window or anything. This man was just deranged.
Right.
Mr. Robert was absolutely right.
When I was in Timaru, there was a very fine GP, and he was semi-retired, I think, when I got to know him in Timaru. He may have been fully retired, but he was shot by a patient.
Shot?
Yeah, shot. And, you know...
There's still a case outstanding of a lawyer in Dunedin who was blown up by an envelope mail way back in 1965 or 63. it's been unsolved. One of our unsolved crimes.
Goodness gracious.
So as lawyers, and those of us who've got a long memory, we always look at our mail quite cautiously. The advantage of email now is you don't open that many letters anymore. And if anything comes in a box, well, I once, I got, as an MP, I got something in a box in my, I threw it on the ground, I jumped on it. You know what it was? They sent me the Good News Bible.
I think that's absolutely delightful. I think that's a delightful note to end on. Dale, thank you very much for coming live on air. There's a heap, a wealth of knowledge in all sorts of areas, and I hope that we can do it again and get John in
yes.
with another topic.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and we'll say good night to everyone.
Good night.